So this is something that always bums me out a little bit when I hear that there are musicians and producers out there that get extremely frustrated, especially in the sync licensing business, when they get feedback from, let's say, a music supervisor, a library executive, any client that's basically interested in licensing their music. And that client doesn't necessarily have all the musical training that you have. And they certainly don't have any formal music training, probably, right? Because their business is not creating music. Their business is the business of licensing music. And so I've heard this from many producers and composers out there where they're working on a gig and they put their music out there and then they get some feedback, they get some notes, and maybe there's a request for a revision. And the notes don't necessarily make sense to you, the producer, the composer, because you think, well, I made this track to sound really epic and intense, for example. And they don't think that it sounds epic or intense. And they might even use words that don't even have a musical meaning, right? They're using words that fall outside of a musical vernacular, right? They're using adjectives or descriptions that are not proper, quote unquote, proper for an actual music producer or a musician to be able to understand exactly what they mean. And so some producers get very offended because they want to think, you're not even a producer, you're not even a musician, and you're telling me my music's not correct, or you're trying to give me some feedback, but you don't even really know what you're saying because you're giving me conflicting messages, or even the things that you're saying don't even really make sense. And so some producers and composers just get completely pissed off and offended, and that's why they don't want to continue on in this business. And so in this video, I really want to just share with you or invite you, if you've struggled with that, or if that's something you think you will struggle with down the road, invite you to look at this whole situation, maybe a brand new way that you've never thought about it. And the way that I think about music and what helps me get through those situations, because I've had it happen to me where I put something together, I feel like I gave them exactly what they were asking for, but they came back with notes that were completely, it felt like contradictory, or even it didn't even make sense to like what a musician would even understand. What are you talking about when you say something needs to sound more expensive? That's not really a musical term. I don't know how to make something sound expensive, right? So some of these conversations and communications can get really murky and kind of in the gray area where you don't really know what's being said. But what helps me to stay out of that frustration side of things is to remember that I, as a, I don't say I was classically trained, but did go to college, got my 4-year degree, been doing music licensing for 12 years. I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for a long time, but I don't get to own music. Okay. And the way that I think and talk about music is not a monopoly. I don't get to decide how everybody else should be thinking and talking and enjoying music. What we do in this business in sync licensing is we put music out for the masses, which the vast majority are not classically trained musicians and producers and composers. Okay. They can't read music. They don't understand scales. They don't understand major and minor. All they know is, hey, I kind of like that song. That's it. Or, I don't really like that song. It's a binary situation for most 95% of the people out there, for most people that are going to be watching television shows, movies, commercials, trailers, radio, video games, everything that we supply our music to. That's really where people are. That's really where the market is, okay? And sometimes that's where your music supervisor is, and that's where your music library owner might be, or your client that you're pitching your music to. So when you get these notes and they sound very juvenile to your ears, or they sound very confusing, or they're just not proper musical terms, rather than getting offended by that or thinking like, well, trying to get on our pedestal a little bit and looking down at somebody who's not using the proper terms, again, that we think people should be using, remember that we're here to serve somebody's needs, right? And just because they are not musically trained, it doesn't mean that they don't need music. Name one person who does not need music in your life. Everybody needs music, okay? And especially in the sync licensing business, they need music for their TV shows, movies, and commercials. And just because they're not classically trained, or they know all the vernacular, or they know how to communicate with us on the level that maybe we're used to communicating, which, by the way, even musicians and producers don't always communicate properly. Even if they're both classically trained and they have all the vernacular, they're not always on the same page. In fact, welcome to being a human being. Most of the time, communication issues and conflicts and discrepancies are pretty much what we're dealing with every single day on planet Earth. So this is not unique actually to what we're doing here. Miscommunication is just a part of the business here of what we're doing on planet Earth. But when you're doing these deals with these clients, trying to zoom out a little bit more in terms of, okay, they said they want this to sound, and I use that example, expensive, because I was actually told that by one of it was a Ford, let's say it was a commercial that I was composing for, and they said, sounds cool, but we want it to sound more expensive. And I was like, I don't even know what expensive means. So, but by showing some curiosity for that, rather than going like, well, you guys are idiots and expensive is not a musical term and my music sounds great, it's exactly what you wanted, and now you're giving me feedback which doesn't make any sense, so to hell with all of this. Rather than me getting stuck and lost in my own frustration with it, zooming out of myself, right? I'm just one part of this equation, but this is a team effort, and my teammate, which is my client at the time, we are a team, needs something from me, and I didn't really get the message. I don't really know exactly what that term means. When you say expensive, what are you hearing? Can you maybe give me a reference track that sounds more expensive to you? Can you think of an instrument to you that sounds more expensive? Or what is it in my track that makes my track maybe feel a little bit cheap or on the bargain end? Because obviously when you're putting your music behind certain products, your music needs to reflect the quality of the product. So it does make sense when it comes to an advertiser's perspective, but it's just where that communication sometimes gets lost. And that's if you're working with a great music supervisor, that's really what the biggest thing a music supervisor does, is they're really a translator, right? They're translating between musicians and corporate clients. So a lot of times those do not talk together clearly, as in my example and in many other examples in my career. So sometimes that music supervisor can be in the middle to kind of help bridge the gap and make sure things are being communicated properly. But sometimes you won't have that middleman. They'll be able to do it. It'll just be you and that client. So I'm just encouraging you that if that's frustrating for you, if that's something that you really struggle with, or you know that that's going to be something in the future that will really bug you and kind of piss you off, try to zoom out of yourself. You do not own music. You don't own the way that you can communicate about music, okay? 3-year-olds communicate about music in a 3-year-old way. Are they wrong for communicating music in the way that makes sense to them? No, that's the way that makes sense for them. Sometimes we can't understand what they're saying, but there's nothing wrong with what they're saying. That's just the language that they use, and that's just how they do it. Same thing for somebody you're going to be working with who is not musically trained and is not going to use all the fancy words and all the particular words that we are used to, so that we can actually really communicate with each other properly and quickly. I should say not properly, but just quickly, right? So rather than getting frustrated, open yourself up, ask questions, ask them to supply you with a reference track, ask them to maybe clarify. The best thing, honestly, when these kind of back and forths go on, is to get on the phone. I really recommend phone calls. Obviously, being in person is not always an option, but if you can at least get on the phone with somebody, if you keep having this sort of misunderstanding, sometimes people can verbalize things that they can't actually write down. And vice versa. Sometimes if you've just been on the phone with somebody, they might be miscommunicating because they're just talking really fast and they're mentally distracted. So sometimes you might want to switch it and say, you know what, can you put all of this stuff in writing, put it in an email, send me that reference track with a link, and that way I can digest it. So if whatever you're doing is not working to get the communication going back and forth, try a different way and offer a different way. Again, be a part of the solution to these situations. Do not become a part of the problem by taking your ball and running home, or being offended and thinking, to hell with all you guys don't know what you're talking about. If you do that, you are part of the problem, because you're basically not being a team member at that time. You're not wanting to be a part of the solution to get to the point where we get the product done, okay? Because the more that you become that solution-oriented member of the team, the more you're going to be invited back to the party, because you were the one when you had a big problem that didn't get scared, didn't get pissed off, didn't run away when your first track was not accepted. You didn't get personally offended by that and run away with it, or be passive aggressive. You just said, absolutely no problem. Let's see if I can help. How else can I be of service and useful to this particular project and to this particular client? If you're not willing to have that mindset and also get out of your own way in terms of our own ego, especially as musicians and producers, which we all have, let's be honest, we all can have that. Get out of our own way and realize that we are a part of a bigger group here, and it's about the project, it's about the client, and it's about whatever it is that this project, this TV show, movie, commercial, trailer, anything, whatever it needs, we need to be in service to that project. And the more that we can mute our own kind of chatter going on in here and get more into the empathetic mode of helping somebody out with their project, the more successful we're going to be and the more gigs we're going to be invited to. So for whatever it's worth, if that's helpful, I really hope you guys take heed to this wisdom, because it's something that does not come easy to a lot of people. And I actually know many producers that do not continue on in this business because of this one issue, just this one thing alone. It bugs them so much they can't deal with it, especially those of you that are classically trained. If you've gone through like a 4-year degree, a 4-year program, you've been classically trained musically in some way, we can kind of get on our high horses because we're like, well, I went to this, prestigious school, so nobody's going to tell me my music wasn't great. Have fun with that kind of a life. I don't want it. I want to be a member of a team. I want to be useful. I want people to give me helpful feedback to help me improve. And I don't want to be a snob, basically. I know that my particular taste and style on how I'm going with music is my particular style. And sometimes that really helps. And sometimes it's not actually hitting the mark. And that's okay, because I'm here to serve their needs, because everybody gets to enjoy music. Everybody gets to be a part of it, right? So anyways, with that being said, I won't keep going on and repeating myself. So I appreciate you guys watching this. Thank you so much. Leave me a like if you found this one useful. And always subscribe, of course, if you're brand new to the channel, because I release videos like this every single week, twice a week, including a podcast every Friday. Thank you so much.